All right, so picture this. You're like poking around in this, this old, maybe abandoned lighthouse, right? And like tucked away in some corner, you find this hidden note.
Oh, I like this.
Yeah, it's probably weathered, a little crumpled, maybe even a little damp. But the words on it, they're just raw emotion. Like someone just poured their heart out onto the page. And that sense of secret vulnerability, that's kind of what we're diving into today. And get this, our source, it actually starts with a really similar image, like a hidden love letter found years later. And it's got this confession in it that totally changes the whole story.
It's funny you say that, because what's so fascinating about that image, that idea, is that it really does tap into something we all feel, something deeply human. This person, they're facing something uncertain. We don't know what, right? But what do they do? What do they choose to reveal in this letter? It's not, some kind of bragging, some attempt to look tough. It's their deepest fear.
Yeah.
And not even like a fear of the sea, but a fear of not being enough. Not being enough for someone else. And that's something we can all relate to, don't you think? Those kind of secret fears that we keep hidden away.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we build these emotional walls around ourselves, right? To protect ourselves. And our source, it actually makes this really interesting comparison, talking about the heart being like a house by the sea.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and you can keep it all boarded up, safe from the storms, right? But then it's also, kind of dark and lonely inside. Or you can open the windows, let the light in. But then, of course, you risk the messiness of the outside world kind of coming in.
And that's it right there, isn't it? That's the core struggle with vulnerability. It's about making that choice to open those windows, to let people really truly see us, flaws and all. And yeah, it can feel incredibly risky, like you're really putting yourself out there. But what I appreciate about how this source tackles this topic is that it challenges that whole idea that this is, weakness, like being open is weak. Instead, it's saying, no, actually true strength, that comes from having the courage to be your real self, to be authentic, especially when it's scary.
Okay, so true. But let's be real, right? Like being vulnerable, it is hard. It's tough. And our source, it gets that. It doesn't pretend it's easy. In fact, it talks about all the ways that fear keeps us from being vulnerable. Like the fear of rejection, of being judged, that feeling of not being good enough. I mean, we've all been there, right? Haven't we all felt those anxieties?
Of course. And it makes sense, right? When you think about it. I mean, we've all been hurt. We've all been disappointed, let down by someone at some point, right? It's only natural that we would, build up some defenses to avoid going through that pain again. But here's where I think the source makes a really, really interesting shift.
It really is. Like, it's such a powerful shift to think about it that way, as vulnerability being this filter, to help you find the people who you really want to have in your life. Because wouldn't you rather have people who get you, who accept the real you, messy bits and all, rather than people who are just like there for the polished version?
100%. And, one of the things I really appreciate about this source is that it doesn't just talk about vulnerability in this kind of, vague way. It gives you something you can actually do, like a practical exercise. They call it the vulnerability share. And it's basically just like it sounds, it's sharing something you're truly, genuinely afraid to say, but sharing it with someone you trust.
Oh, yeah, I remember that part. And it's not like just dumping all your stuff on just anybody, right? It's really important that you choose the right person, someone who's earned your trust, who isn't going to judge you, who can just kind of hold space for you,
Exactly. It's about creating that safe space. And what makes this exercise so powerful, what makes it really work, is that it puts so much emphasis on the listening. Because it's not about trying to swoop in with advice or trying to fix each other's problems, which, let's face it, that's kind of our default mode a lot of the time, isn't it? Yeah. Instead, it's just about being present with each other, being okay with the discomfort, with the fear, the insecurity, and just offering empathy and understanding without trying to change anything.
Easier said than done, though, right? Like, it's so much harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
Because we're so used to wanting to jump in and fix things, offer solutions. But you're right. Sometimes just feeling truly heard, like really listened to, that's the best thing, the most powerful thing you can give someone, isn't it?
It really is, and that's something the source highlights so well. This idea that vulnerability isn't, this problem to be solved. It's not something to get rid of. It's just part of being human. Part of what connects us, and by creating that safe space to share those parts of ourselves, even the parts we're scared of, well, that's how we build these really deep, authentic connections.
Yeah, it's like when we let go of that need to have all the answers, that's when we can really connect, on a deeper level. And it doesn't always have to be these big, emotional reveals, these grand confessions, right?
Yeah.
Because the Source also talks about vulnerability in those smaller, more everyday moments.
You're absolutely right. It's about those little moments where we choose to be real, to be authentic, instead of, putting on a show, like admitting when we don't know something, or asking for help instead of just struggling on our own, even just saying, I love you first. Those things might seem small, but they actually take a lot of courage. And over time, those small acts, they build up, they really can build trust and intimacy in a way that nothing else can.
It's true. It's like each one of those little acts of vulnerability, it's like a tiny crack in those walls we were talking about, those walls we build around our hearts. Each crack lets in a little more light, a little more connection. And what I love is that the Source reminds us that it's not about, some instant fix. It's about the long game. It's about consistency. Those small, consistent actions, they're what really make a difference over time.
Absolutely. It's not a one-time thing. It's a lifelong practice.
Yeah.
This practice of showing up authentically. In those big conversations, sure, but also in those smaller, quieter moments of everyday life.
So where does that leave us? We've been talking about this idea of vulnerability, not as, some weakness, but as a real strength, as a language we can learn to speak, to really connect with each other, and as this filter that helps us build those truly authentic relationships. It's like discovering this whole new way of being connected to ourselves and to people that we care about.
And you know what? One of the things that I really like about this Source, this whole exploration of vulnerability, is that it doesn't, sugarcoat things. It doesn't shy away from the fact that it's messy sometimes. It acknowledges that there's risk involved. You might get hurt, but it also reminds us that the payoff, the feeling of really connecting with someone, of truly letting them see us, it's usually worth it.
It's like that quote, how does it go? Something like, you can't numb those difficult feelings, the vulnerability, without also numbing, the good stuff too, the joy, the gratitude.
Exactly. It's all connected, isn't it? It's about embracing it all, the whole spectrum of human experience. And while this Source definitely encourages us to kind of step outside of those comfort zones, to take some risks, it's not about promising that everything's going to be perfect. It just suggests that if we build those walls that keep the vulnerability out, they end up keeping us from experiencing so much, all the richness and the depth of really connecting with other people.
So it's a choice then. It's a choice we have to make to be authentic, to be vulnerable, even when it's scary, because we see that the reward, those moments of real connection, they're worth it. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what this all comes down to. It leaves us with this really powerful question. Knowing that vulnerability is something we practice, a muscle we can strengthen. What's one small act of courage, just one, you can embrace today? Maybe it's finally sharing something you've been afraid to say, or maybe it's asking for help, asking for support when you need it, or even just being a little more honest with yourself and with others about how you're really feeling.
It doesn't have to be this big dramatic thing, does it? It's those small everyday acts of courage that really start to make a difference. They chip away at those walls little by little, and they open up space for something more connection, more realness, just more life, really.
Yeah.
So as you go from here, from this deep dive, from this conversation, just remember, vulnerability, it's not the enemy. It's not something to be afraid of. It's the key. It's the key to unlocking those really meaningful connections, starting with the connection we have with ourselves.